Doodly-bop, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Doodly-bop, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Doodly-bop, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Doodly-bop, ba-da-ba-ba, ba-da-ba-ba-ba. Merry Christmas.
Christ was born, let's celebrate.
Merry Christmas.
God's in love to show the way.
Merry Christmas.
Let us shout the news to every land.
Merry Christmas.
Our Savior's born in Bethlehem. Giving the gift of love through Christ His Son. Train us our far to the east. Pointing the way to Emmanuel lay. Guiding them to the Prince of Peace. Heavenly host appeared to men that night, praising the Lord and saying this: let there be peace on earth to men tonight, on whom His favor rests.
Merry Christmas.
Christ was born, let's celebrate.
Merry Christmas.
God's in love to show us the way.
Merry Christmas.
Shout the news to every land.
I must go worship Him.
Calling together wise men to come forth, all in search of the King of Kings. Reaching the place of the newborn baby, a child humbly fell on bended knee, offering gifts of incense, myrrh, and gold to lay at Jesus' feet.
Merry Christmas.
Bring Him your gift of love and say,
Merry Christmas.
bow before our King today.
Little did they know Christ they would be King, giving the greatest gift of love as He took away their sin. Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Oh, Christ was born to celebrate.
Merry Christmas.
God's in love to show the way.
Merry Christmas.
Put up and shout the news to every
Merry
land.
Christmas.
Savior born in Bethlehem. So when you think of how this all began, a celebration seems just right. Sing hallelujah on this Christmas day. We've been given the gift of love.
The gift of life. Give the gift of life. Give the gift of life. Give the gift of life. Merry Christmas. The gift of life. Merry Christmas. The gift of life.
Lay down your head, go off to sleep. Dream of our love and a future so sweet. Dream of the days that are waiting out there, of all the joy our family will share. Now you're here, and you're more than we had dreamed of. Now you're here, and you know we think the world of you. I thank my God who has answered our prayer and delivered you safe in His care, 'cause now you're here. Close little eyes, rest your sweet head. Mom and Dad will pray for you and put you to bed. We'll be your friends as we're watching you grow. Help you learn the things you should know. Now you're here, and you're more than we had dreamed of. Now you're here.
Good evening. It's good to be with you tonight and looking forward to sharing another message from the book of Isaiah. So, welcome. And I know it's getting close to Christmas, a little Christmas music to go there. We are going to be in Isaiah chapters 36 and 37 tonight. So I'll be live streaming with you tonight, and the next 2 Wednesday nights after tonight, Jeff Henry will be live streaming. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to some message that you can hear from Jeff. So hopefully you have. We always put the text on the screen, but hopefully you have your own Bible, your own iPad, whatever you normally read the Bible with. So I hope you have that available with you tonight. And we are going to be reading in Isaiah chapter 36. Let me get to that chapter so we can just study that together. There's some really interesting lessons in Isaiah chapter 36 and 37. It is about Hezekiah and when Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, invades Judah, and the faith that Hezekiah has in God. And again, there's several really good lessons that we can draw from this. So, if you want to keep notes, if you don't want to keep notes, if you ever want any notes or anything that I use on a Wednesday night live stream, just send me an email and I will get those notes to you, PowerPoint, anything that I've used for that. I read not long ago that outside of David and Solomon, no king of Judah was given more attention than Hezekiah. I didn't go back and look at that. I didn't research it. I didn't check to see if that statement was true. It sounds like it's probably true. There's several things in the text about Hezekiah. He has 11 chapters in the Bible that are dedicated to him. And tonight we'll look at Sennacherib as Sennacherib invades Judah, and the lessons from Hezekiah in 36 and 37. Next week, chapters 38 and 39 are also about Hezekiah when Jeff shares those with us. And it's interesting in that section of Isaiah, there's a break between, it's like 36 and 37 chapter 38 starts another break in the books. 37 kind of looks back to Assyria. 38 starts looking forward to Babylon. So you'll see maybe a little bit of a break, although it's in the same stories about Hezekiah when you see that. So just kind of be thinking about that as we go through the rest of the book of Isaiah. We're getting ready to enter into another section of the book. It's like chapters 1 through chapter 37 is one section, and 38 through the end of the book is another section. So you might see that. And just be aware of that as you're reading through the book of Isaiah. So Hezekiah began his reign somewhere around 715 BC. It could be that he was co-regent with his father a little bit before that, maybe as early as 729. But 715 is when he began to be a king by himself, and he did some really great things. If you can read this in 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, he restored the temple worship. He restored the Passover. He led this restoration of God as they went back to the law, and kind of a 2-week celebration of Passover that he led. He even invited the Jews from the northern kingdom to participate in that. And there's this really interesting verse. It's in 2 Chronicles, I believe it's chapter 31. It says, "See, in every work that he began in the service of the house of God, and in the law, and in the commandments, to see his God, he did it with all his heart and prospered." And that's a real interesting testament to Hezekiah, that he did it with everything that he did for God. He did it with all of his heart. And 2 Kings chapter 18, and we can go read some of this in a little bit, but one of the verses about Hezekiah, it says, "He trusted in the Lord God of Israel, so that after him was none like him among all the kings of Judah, nor any that were before him." And that's very high praise of this trust that Hezekiah has in God. And you'll see that it'll come out in the lesson that we're looking at tonight. So kind of what happened is after the fall of Israel, let's go to, let me go to a map here if I can. So after the fall of Israel, this is a map of kind of how Assyria in different stages was conquering. So at the time that we're looking at, we're down in this section of the map. So the king of Assyria has come in and he has conquered Israel, and he has conquered all the fortified cities of Judah, all except Jerusalem, basically. So after Israel's fall, Judah just has this back and forth confrontation that's going on with Assyria. And one of the things it says about about Hezekiah in 2 Kings, let me see if I can find that, find the right chapter here. And it says, he trusted in the Lord, the God of Israel, so that there was none like him among all the kings of Judah after him, nor among those who were before him. For he held fast to the Lord. He did not depart from following him, but he kept the commandments that the Lord commanded Moses. And the Lord was with him wherever he went out, he prospered. He rebelled against the king of Assyria and would not serve him, and he struck down the Philistines as far as Gaza and its territory, from watchtower to fortified city. So as Hezekiah he's in this scenario in his world where the king of Assyria looks like he is going to conquer everything that stands in front of him. And the only thing that's left for Hezekiah is a little section of Judah and Israel. And in Isaiah chapter 36, Sennacherib comes, he invades Judah, he conquers all of the great territories, and we saw that on this map just a second ago. Let's go back to that. So he's conquered all the fortified cities of Judah. Hezekiah just has this little section down here on this map around this red dot, which is Jerusalem. And the king of Assyria has basically conquered everything else, and it looks like the king of Assyria is going to come conquer Jerusalem. That's kind of the historical setting of what's going on in the lesson tonight. Now, it's when you think about that, there's kind of this interesting thing going on, because in the midst of all of this, Hezekiah has been leading this great resurgence to go back and trust God. And even when the king of Assyria comes and he begins to attack, one of the things that happens, I showed you that map, in 2 Chronicles chapter 32, it's Hezekiah is trying to reassure the people. And the king of Assyria is knocking on the walls of Jerusalem. I mean, he's already come and given them a message telling them he's going to come conquer. And we'll read that message in just a second. But we're going to be reading from Isaiah. I want to get this verse from 2 Chronicles, because this is the message that Hezekiah had to the people. Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid or discouraged because of the king of Assyria and the vast army with him. For there is a greater power with us than with him. With him is only the arm of flesh, but with us is the Lord our God to help us and to fight our battles. That is a great, hang on just a second. That is a great lesson for us in our world, isn't it? I mean, you look at what's going on and you can say, whatever's happening in this world, and the armies, the money, the forces, whatever is out there, there's a greater power with us who are the children of God than with whatever is going on in the world. They might have the arm of flesh where they're a leader or a government or a political system. It doesn't matter what it is. That's an arm of flesh. But we have with us our Lord God to help us fight our battles. And when we look at Hezekiah tonight and we look at some of the things that are going on, that's the thing that I really want you to remember. Whatever's happening in the world, we have the Lord our God to help us fight our battles. So in this section of Isaiah, this section of Hezekiah's life, there are three crises that he is facing. They come in succession to one another, and they come fairly quickly. There is the invasion of the Assyrians. So it looks like Assyria is going to come conquer Jerusalem, but Hezekiah has faith in God. Now, there's a couple of things that happen in that, okay? And you can go back and read this in Second Kings and Second Chronicles. The king of Assyria comes and he asked for tribute from Hezekiah, and Hezekiah pays him tribute so the king of Assyria won't invade Jerusalem. And that might have been a little bit of lack of faith. I really think that it was. But after he pays tribute, the king of Assyria comes to attack him anyway. So the king of Assyria didn't honor the agreement that he made with Hezekiah. I mean, imagine that. Imagine how many times in our world we hear a political leader say, if you do this, then I will do this, and we do the thing they ask, or the country does the thing that they ask, or a section of people do the thing that he asked, and then the leader or the politician doesn't follow through on his promise. That's a lesson for our world too. So you have this invasion of the Assyrians that he's facing. Next week, Jeff will deal with the next two of these. There's sickness and near death, and there's a visit of some Babylonian envoys. Remember, 38 is kind of a switch from Assyria to Babylon in the narrative in Isaiah. So there are three big things that are going on in Hezekiah's life and in the nation of Judah. Now, here's the thing that I think is really interesting about that. Hezekiah's crisis, this particular crisis about the king of Assyria who is going to come and invade Jerusalem, that actually comes while things are going fairly well for Hezekiah. Remember, God's blessing Hezekiah. He's blessing him in all the things that he does because he has faith. He's restored the temple worship. He's beginning to honor the Passover again. I mean, Hezekiah is doing all of the right things. So you would expect, if Hezekiah is doing the right things, you would expect, well, only blessing is coming, right? But that's not the case. There's this, Isaiah has been warning them about this, that because of their callousness, even though they're doing the outward forms of worship, because they're not really honoring God, they're not really seeking God with their heart, that God is going to bring a judgment upon them. He's going to bring a discipline upon them. But when we look at things in our world and we think, well, we're doing all of the right things, even if we're just doing the motions and don't even really have the heart about it, we think, well, we're doing the right things. We expect that God is going to come along and God's only going to give us good things. But it doesn't really work that way. And there's an opportunity here that God uses this discipline not only for Hezekiah, but also for the nation of Judah. So if you're going along, you think, well, I'm trying to do everything right, so everything that happens is going to be good. That might not actually be the case, because this crisis for Hezekiah came when things were going really well. So let's go over to the text, and we're going to go over to Isaiah chapter 36. And we're going to join along there. And I'm not going to read all of this, but we get a date. In the 14th year of King Hezekiah, Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, came against all the fortified cities of Judah and took them. And the king of Assyria sent the Rabshika from Lachish to King Hezekiah at Jerusalem with a great army, and he stood by the conduit of the upper pool on the highway to the washer's field. And there came out to him Eliakim, the son of Hilkiah, who is over the household, and Shebna the secretary, and Joah the son of Asaph the recorder. Now, this Rabshika right here, this word, that's not really the name of someone. That is a military title. And there are three military titles that is used. They're not used in Isaiah chapter 36, but all three of them are used if you read the account over in 2 Kings. There's one called the Tartan, and he is a word that means a supreme commander. And again, these aren't personal names, they're military titles. There is the Rabsaris, which is the chief officer, and the Rabshika, which is the field commander. And so Sennacherib sends out three important people to give the message, and Hezekiah sends out three important people to receive the message. But they're kind of close to the city wall, at least we'll see when we read through this. So here's the message. And again, you can go back and read this in Isaiah chapter 36. I don't need to read the whole chapter to you. Here is the message of the Rabshika. Go tell Hezekiah that the great king, the king of Assyria, what are you trusting in that you think that your city is not going to fall to my army? I mean, do you think that and it's interesting to use it, mere words are strategy and power for, are words strategy and power for war? And who do you trust? I mean, do you trust in Egypt? Because Egypt is kind of this broken reed of a staff, and it'll pierce the hand of any man who leans on it. So you can't trust in Pharaoh. But then he gets to this really important part of the message. In verse 7 of chapter 36, but if you say to me, we trust in the Lord our God, is it not he whose high places and altars Hezekiah has removed, saying to Judah and to Jerusalem, you shall worship me before this altar? Now, I think that's really interesting. Now, part of what the Rabshika is saying is very true, isn't it? I mean, Hezekiah tore down the high places and the altars and said, come back to the temple which stands in Jerusalem and worship there. And it's kind of, I think it's kind of an interesting point. Although his message is true here, he doesn't understand that what Hezekiah actually, the decision that Hezekiah made was actually a godly decision. And the world doesn't understand, at least all of the time, and sometimes not any of the time, a godly decision. So the king of Assyria and the Rabshika says, well, you're trusting in God, but Hezekiah tore down all the high places where you would go worship. But they didn't realize that by tearing the high places down, Hezekiah was actually honoring God. So how many times in our world do we do something that actually honors God, and the world would look at that and say, well, what are you doing? Because they don't have the foundation and the truth that God has given us for them to understand what the actions that we're performing are. And so the world doesn't always understand godly decisions. And that's just kind of an aside in this lesson. But I think it's really important, because the Rabshika thinks, well, since Hezekiah tore down the altars and the high places and saying that they should worship before this altar, he thought that Hezekiah was not honoring God when Hezekiah was really honoring God. And he says, okay, I'll give you 2,000 horses. And if you can put men on 2,000 horses, then we'll fight. But he knows he's not able to put riders on them. So how can the message, this is a great part of the message, verse 9, how can you repulse a single captain of the least among my master's servants when you trust in Egypt for chariots and for horsemen? Now he says one thing that really gets their attention, and I want to move this over for just a second so I can get all of these verses on the screen at one time. And it was just kind of in a page break right there that I did not want. Verse 10, he really gets Eliakim and Shebna's and Joah's attention, because he says, moreover, is it without the Lord that I have come against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. You know, that really gets their attention, because from that time he says, well, just speak to us in Aramaic and not in so that the people on the wall can hear, because we understand Aramaic, but they wouldn't. And the Rabshika says, well, I didn't just come to give you a message. I came to give a message to everybody, the men sitting on the wall who, we'll go to all the things that they were going to do. But he cries out in a loud voice, which is the language of Judah. But this particular statement gets their attention. This is when they ask him to speak in Aramaic. Because is it without the Lord that I have come up against this land to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. Because Isaiah has been prophesying this message for years, that if you don't turn to me, if you don't turn your heart back to me, then I'm going to come and destroy your land. And so when the Rabshika comes with the message from Sennacherib, they're thinking, okay, this is the message and the judgment that's coming. But after he says that, I think maybe he kind of makes a tactical error after he says that. Because in verse 15 he says, Do not let Hezekiah make you trust the Lord by saying, the Lord will surely deliver us. This city will not be given into the hand of the king of Assyria. Do not listen to Hezekiah. For thus says the king of Assyria, make your peace with me and come out to me. And then a little later, he says, where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? Where are the gods? Let me see if I can highlight that. Let's go back up here. Has any of the gods of the nations delivered his land out of the hand of the king of Assyria? Where are the gods of Hamath and Arphad? And where are the gods of the the Sepharvaim? Have they delivered Samaria out of my hand? Who among all of the gods of these lands have delivered their lands out of my hand, that the Lord should deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? So although he says he's coming to bring judgment from the Lord, then he turns around and says, well, why should you even think that the Lord, meaning the God of Israel, can deliver Jerusalem out of my hand? And so what I want to look at after that is the way that that Hezekiah responds to that. The first thing I want to say is simply this. A crisis does not make a person. It shows what a person is made of. So this crisis that Hezekiah is getting ready to address, and in our lives, I think this is why this lesson is so important. In our lives, we might also address a crisis. We probably will. I know very, very few people that sometime in their life have not had to face some type of crisis, something in life that's going wrong, something that doesn't seem to be working the way it should be, or something that comes from the outside and it seems just in a moment to be able to destroy our lives. Several people have seen that over the last week with just natural disaster. But a crisis doesn't make a person. It shows what a person is made of. The crisis didn't make Hezekiah, but it gave Hezekiah an opportunity to show God how much he trusted in him. So this is what Hezekiah does. Hezekiah goes out, and I want to go back to the PowerPoint for just a second. This is how Hezekiah responds to the crisis. And you can read this in Isaiah chapter 37 if you want to spend time in that in a few minutes. He tore his clothes. He covered himself with sackcloth, which is an act of repentance and humility. He took off. Just think this is a king. So if you think of a king, or you think of a president, and our president doesn't wear like a crown and a robe. You usually see our president, he's wearing a suit. But what if there was a crisis in our nation? And there are crises in our nation, by the way. But what if our president came out and he, instead of wearing a suit and instead of looking immaculate and being dressed so well, he came out wearing a sack? What if he came out showing humility before God, knowing that there's nowhere for him to turn and he can't figure out the right decision to make until he turns to God? But what if it's not just a president? What if there's something going on in your life where it's a crisis, and what you're trying to show to God is the humility that you have? And you don't have, it's not necessary to put on sackcloth to show humility. But a question that you ask yourself in a time of crisis: do you really have humility before your God? Do you have a humble heart? Are you still trying to figure everything out yourself, come up with your own plan, solve everything yourself, come up with the best military strategy, or the best strategy to try to undo the thing that you've done, or maybe the thing to try to fix in your life that you actually had no control that it was even coming, right? Hezekiah didn't have any control of whether Assyria was going to invade or not. But do you have humility before God when you come to a situation where you are not in control, and you're searching for the right decision, and you know that there is no way that you can there's no way that you can succeed, or there's no way that you can overcome the problem unless God steps in and helps? So Hezekiah, he tears his clothes and he puts on sackcloth as a symbol of humility. He goes in to the house of the Lord. Now remember, for Hezekiah, that temple where the Ark of the Covenant, that represented the presence of God. So he went to a place that was as close to God as he thought he could possibly go. Now, I don't know where that is for you. I don't know. I mean, a church building is not like a temple. God doesn't live in the church building. We know that. But the church building represents God. So it's like in a hospital where there's a chapel. Maybe you go to the chapel because you know God doesn't just live in the chapel, but there's something that's holy in the sense that, that there's something that reminds you of the presence of God. Maybe you go into the house of the Lord. Maybe you go to a church. Maybe you go to a place where you go often to pray. Maybe you go to a place where it's quiet. Maybe to a place you can be alone. Maybe instead of alone, you need to have numerous people around you praying. So maybe instead of going into the house of the Lord, you go to a place where you can have a lot of people around you, a lot of people surrounding you with prayer. Whatever place in your life, in your heart, is the closest place you can get to God. So he has humility. He goes as close as he can to God. And then he sends messengers to Isaiah because he knows Isaiah is the man of God. So he sends messengers to the man that he knows will have a message from God. So when you're in that crisis, do you turn to God? Do you go to the place where you know you can have that message from God? I mean, obviously, I have a Bible sitting on my desk here, have one on my computer, you can see that. But do you go there? I mean, do you go look for a message from God? Or maybe there's someone that you trust, somebody that you know is a spiritual mentor to you, someone that you know discerns the Word of God correctly, someone that can help you see through the struggle, to see the right thing to do and the godly thing to do. He sends messengers to Isaiah, and then he prays. He actually he takes that letter and he spreads it out before God. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Maybe there's a letter you need to spread out before God. But he spreads the letter out before God, and he prays to God, asking God to show his glory to the world. And hang on to that. We're going to get to that again in just a second. Here's the other thing about this particular part of Isaiah 36 and 37. Sorry, I got something in my throat. What seems inevitable often isn't inevitable. I mean, it looked like it was inevitable that Assyria was going to attack Jerusalem. I mean, they had attacked Samaria and Israel. They had conquered them and taken them into captivity. Every fortified city of Judah, Sennacherib had come and conquered all of the fortified cities. There was no other fortified city as a protection. He's even using one of those fortified cities as his home base when he is in that area of the world. So it seems inevitable that Jerusalem is next. But because of the power of God, what seemed inevitable wasn't really inevitable because God intervened. So when you're in a spot in life where it seems like something is inevitable, and it doesn't look like it's a good kind of inevitable either, right? It's just something that you really don't want to happen, kind of like Assyria invading Jerusalem. But it's not always inevitable because the power of God can step in. Maybe it's an illness, maybe it's a sickness, maybe it's a struggle you're having at work. Maybe it's a personal struggle that you're having. Maybe it's a personal sin that you're dealing with. Maybe it's a marital problem or a parenting problem. Maybe it's a problem with relationships or friendships or co-workers. And you just go down the list as far as you want to go. But what might look inevitable isn't inevitable unless God wants it to be inevitable. And what happened here is because of Hezekiah's faith, God is going to step in and stop the Assyrian invasion. I mean, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers are going to die without any soldier of Judah even picking up a weapon. I mean, God is going to do it all on his own. I mean, it's not like they went into battle and they defeated Assyria in battle. God defeated the Assyrians while those in Jerusalem were still inside the city wall, because Hezekiah had faith in God, and Hezekiah asked that God's name be proclaimed in the nation and in the world. So when you're looking at that scenario, that crisis, that problem that looks like there is absolutely no way to overcome it, remember that when God gets involved, God can do the things that God chooses to do. And inevitable always doesn't mean that it's inevitable. It means that it needs to be given to God. So it's kind of like the letter that Hezekiah spreads out. What decision do you need to spread out before the Lord? I mean, what's going on in your life that you just need to lay it out before God, and you pray over it, and you trust in God, and you, by faith in Him, you trust in His action. Now, you have to realize that doesn't mean that you always get exactly what you want. It doesn't mean that it's kind of like a machine that you put in a prayer and out pops the blessing that you want. But it means, and remember that humility, you go to God with the humility, and then you allow God to work in the way that God knows that it's best for Him to work. Like, for example, you might be praying that God will take away a consequence of a decision you made. But maybe what God needs you to do is to deal with the consequence so that you learn from it. Or maybe God takes it away, or He shows you a way to overcome it. But part of that is the discipline process. But the question for you is, Hezekiah had a nation that nobody could defeat, knocking at the city wall, telling them that he was going to defeat them, and he blasphemed the name of God. And Hezekiah takes that and he spreads it out before God. So what do you need to spread out before God? What decision? Now here's another, I think, really interesting thing, and we'll go to the text and look at this. And we've talked about this a couple of other weeks. Those that God uses often don't realize they're being used. You know, when the Rabshika comes before him and he says, you know, it's God has sent me to do this thing. There is some truth in that, because God had sent the Assyrians to bring some training, some discipline. He was using them for a purpose. But when God responds to Hezekiah, and this is in Isaiah chapter 37, and God is actually prophesying Sennacherib's fall, which we'll get to in a minute. But this is, listen to what God says to Sennacherib, who is the king of Assyria. And I want to read this because I want you to realize that God can say this to any ruler of any nation who is on the face of our world today. And he can, I know I'm broadcasting from Pleasant View, Tennessee, so I'm in the United States. So God could say this to the President of the United States if he chose to. Whom have you mocked and reviled? Against whom have you raised your voice and lifted your eyes to the heights? Against the Holy One of Israel. By your servants you have mocked the Lord, and you have said, with my many chariots I have gone up to the heights of the mountains, to the far recesses of Lebanon, to cut down its tallest cedars, its choice cypresses, to come to its remotest height, its most fruitful forest. I dug wells and drank waters to dry up with the sole of my foot all of the streams of Egypt. And here's the interesting part. Have you not heard that I determined it long ago? I planned from days of old what now I bring to pass, that you should make fortified cities crash into heaps of ruins, while their inhabitants, shorn of strength, are dismayed and confounded, and become like plants of the field and like tender grass, like grass on the housetops blighted before it is grown. Excuse me. I know you're sitting down and you're going out and coming in, and you're raging against me. Because you have raged against me and your complacency has come to my ears, I will put my hook in your nose and my bit in your mouth, and I will turn you back on the way by which you came. What God is saying to the king of Assyria is, everything that you're doing, I've determined that it's going to happen. Whatever's happening in your world, it's all under my control. You think that it's because of your power and might that you're coming to destroy or fight against Jerusalem, but and that you were able to take Israel, but that's not true. It is because I appointed you to do that you're able to cause those things to happen. And so the king of Assyria, in all of his might and majesty, thought he was doing things by his own power. He was only doing it because it fit into God's plan. And the same is true of our world today. There's another lesson in there. When we make a request to God, it's for God's glory and not for ours. That's one of the really remarkable things about Hezekiah's prayer. When Hezekiah offers this prayer for deliverance, and let me get the right verses on the screen so we can just look at the verses, get them all on the same page. So when Hezekiah gets this message, this letter from the king of Assyria, he received the letter from the hand of the messengers and read it, and went up to the house of the Lord, and he spread it out before the Lord. Now listen to his prayer. O Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, enthroned above the cherubim, you are the God, you alone, of all the kingdoms of the earth, and you have made the earth, the heaven and earth. Now, that's interesting because God is still the God that's enthroned above the cherubim, isn't he? Incline your ear, O Lord, and hear. Open your eyes, O Lord, and see, and hear all the words of Sennacherib, which he has sent to mock the living God. Truly, O Lord, the kings of Assyria have laid waste to all the nations in their land, and have cast their gods into the fire. For they were no gods, but work of men's hands, wood and stone. Therefore they were destroyed. So now, O Lord our God, save us from his hand, that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are the Lord. Do you catch this part of Hezekiah's prayer? That God, he is God alone. He is the one who created everything and sits above the heavens. And his prayer is not that, okay, God, just come save me from Sennacherib. Don't let the king of Assyria do the things that the king of Assyria is going to do. No, God, he's mocked you. And I want you to act in a way that all the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God. So he's not just praying for his own deliverance. He's praying that God's glory will be shown in the earth. And that is a great prayer for Christians who live in our time. We don't pray just for the thing that we want, just not God, give me all the things that I want, but God, work in the world in a way that the world knows that you alone are God. However you need to work, because the other gods of the world aren't gods. There is only one true God who sits above the cherubim, who created the heavens and the earth. And work in the world in a way that the world knows that. So when we pray, and we're addressing our crisis, can we address the crisis with the humility before God that we ask, okay, God, in this crisis, in this thing that's happening in my life, can you work in a way, can you act in a way that the kingdoms of the earth may know that you alone are God? And there's another lesson in that, and that is simply this. Those who mock God will not go unpunished. Those who go against his teaching, those who do not honor him for who he is. The interesting thing, one of the interesting things about this story is, and I want to go to the end of Isaiah chapter 37. And the angel of the Lord went out and struck down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And when the people arose early in the morning, behold, these were all dead bodies. Then Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, departed and returned home and lived at Nineveh. And it's very interesting that God said that's exactly what's going to happen. It says in verse 33, he shall not come into this city, or shoot an arrow there, or come before it with a shield, or cast up a siege mount against it. By the way that he came, by the same he shall return. He shall not come into this city, declares the Lord. So God honors his request. Sorry about that, about to sneeze. And when he was worshiping in the house of Nisroch, his god, his sons struck him down with a sword. So here's the thing that I think is really interesting. The very gods that Sennacherib said, we're going to come and attack, and your God's not going to be able to stop me because of who I am. Where are the gods of all of these other places? That God that he trusted in when he was mocking the God of Israel that God was not able to protect him even in his God's own temple. So he died. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So he died in the temple of his God. He died in the temple of the God that he trusted, and the God that Hezekiah trusted in delivered him by striking down 185,000 in the camp of the Assyrians. And I think that's really ironic, because God brought deliverance because his name had been ridiculed. There's some really good lessons in Isaiah chapter 36, 37. I hope you got some of those. Hope you wrote some of those down. And go back. I encourage you to go back and read 36 and 37 and look at that. Now, just a little announcement for this coming Sunday. So Sunday morning, right before this live stream, I was over helping Cheryl Kilgore as she prepared our kids for a Christmas play. So this Sunday morning, during the time that we would normally be having a sermon, the kids are going to present that. 12th grade and down are going to present a Christmas play for us. So please make plans to attend that. I know they'd like to see a full crowd there, see a lot of people, and they've been practicing really hard. I think it's going to be great, and please just mark on your calendar to be at Clarksville Highway Church of Christ December the 19th. You won't be able, I have a short devotional at the end of it, okay? But you're not coming to hear me preach. You're coming to see them do their play. So please plan on being with us Sunday morning. So we'll be live streaming that as well. We always put this up here for you. We're live streaming at ClarksvilleHighwayChurch.com. By the way, the website's being redone. Starting to look good. Trying to get kind of a grasp on that. GospelChariot.church. You can see the live stream there. Clarksville Highway Church of Christ or Gospel Chariot Church on the Facebook page, or there's a YouTube channel called Gospel Chariot. All of you know that by now, but you can see that in all of those places. I'm going to look and see if there are any comments, questions. Don't see any there. Last time I'm going to check my text message, because somebody sent me a question 2 weeks ago, and they sent it to my phone, and I did not see it till I was already finished, so apologize for that. And I hope you've enjoyed the live stream tonight, and look forward to being on here with you again. It will be the first of the year before I am back on the live stream. Jeff will be doing the next 2 weeks. So have a great evening, and we will see you later.